Welcome to Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. This week, we examine the impact of two transformative laws. In the second half of our show, we'll speak with Barbara Anderson, Executive Director of Citizens for Limited Taxation, who led the Massachusetts Proposition 2.5 tax revolt 35 years ago. Up first, we're pleased to welcome Sally Pipes, President and CEO of the Pacific Research Institute, to take a look at Obamacare on its 6th anniversary. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Bill, for having me on.
Sally, I asked you on to give us an update on how Obamacare is transforming American medicine. Before we get on to suggestions on how to fix its myriad problems, how about a run through an inventory of its impacts? Let's start with the headline reason the Affordable Care Act was put in place, and that's coverage. How many Americans lack health care coverage today compared to before Obamacare, and has this met the forecasts made by Obamacare promoters?
Well, the law, the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as I like to call it, celebrated its 6th anniversary on March 23rd. According to government sources, they say that 12.7 million have signed up on the exchanges as of the end of January, but 28.8 million people still lack coverage as of the end of 2015, which is down from the 44.8 million that lacked insurance in 2013.
So we are seeing an increase in numbers, and that comes along with consequences. What have insurance premiums done? They were promised to go down, have they?
Well, remember, the president promised us over and over again that the average family would see their premium go down by $2,500. Mm-hmm. Well, that has not proved to be true. In fact, this year, 2016, the average premium is up 9% to $408 per month. And 83% of that 12.7 million people that I talked about signing up on the exchanges, 83% of them are going to receive subsidies. So they will only pay $113 a month. But as I say, the average plan is up 9%. The cheapest silver plan is up 13%. And across all metallic plans, 20.3%.
So there's an enormous amount of income redistribution going on in the background here.
Well, exactly. And of that 12.7 million, according to government sources, about 15% of them will not pay the first month's premium.
Is it possible for people to buy lower-cost health insurance if they give up mandated benefits they don't need or may not be relevant? I mean, for example, as an aging baby boomer, I don't need maternity or fertility benefits, and I'm never going to go see an acupuncturist.
Well, I'm an aging baby boomer myself, and I'm not going to need fertility treatment or maternity care either. But no, it's not possible. Under the exchanges and under the Affordable Care Act, in addition to about 2,100 mandates that the states provide and make health insurance plans cover, there are about 48 to 50 mandates in each state. The Essential Benefit Plan under Obamacare adds 10 more mandates. So it is not possible to buy a stripped-down plan that covers just the type of coverage that you would want.
And what's the purpose of the mandates for people who don't want them?
Part of the reason, if you look at the enrollment under Obamacare in the 38 states that people are signed up under healthcare.gov, the federal exchange, only 12 states and D.C. have their own exchanges. But you have to look at the young people. I mean, the whole idea of Obamacare was that the uninsured would be wiped out, everyone would have coverage, and that the cost of healthcare would go down. Well, who is going to be supporting the aging baby boomers like us under this plan? Well, it's what we call the young invincibles, those people who are 18 to 34. And in order for Obamacare to work and be in the black, they needed about 40% of the young invincibles to sign up for coverage on the plans. And in fact, only 28% of these young invincibles have signed up. And I think that's why we're seeing companies like United Health, Aetna, Humana, Cigna, all saying, we may not be able to provide exchange coverage in 2017 because they're losing on these exchange plans.
What's happened to deductibles? I mean, ours have gone up to $5,800 a year in network and double that out of network. And what's worse, we get billed at the sucker rate and not the negotiated rate until we fulfill our deductible. Are these kind of increases widespread?
Yes, they are. And under healthcare.gov, the average deductible is $3,000 or more. On a silver plan this year, the most popular exchange plan, an individual deductible is $3,117 and $6,480 for a family. So, if you're middle class, these deductibles are just not doable. People don't have that kind of money sitting around in their bank account, and they were promised lower premiums, lower deductibles, and we're seeing that is not the case. And we're also seeing that a number of people, when they call their doctor's office, they're amazed to find out that the doctor that they had before Obamacare is no longer covered under the network offered under their exchange plan.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Everybody knows that the promise that you can keep your doctor hasn't worked out. But, you know, my PCP retired, and I was told there was an 18-month waiting list to get assigned a new PCP. I mean, fortunately, my wife's a doctor, and I was able to use her connections to jump the waiting list. But that surely means I bumped some other poor soul off the bottom. What's happened to doctor access and wait times to get an appointment under Obamacare?
One of the main features of Obamacare was expansion of Medicaid, the program for low-income Americans. Mm-hmm. And the court ruled that the federal government could not force the states to expand their Medicaid programs. But, in fact, a lot of the states have, and there are probably only 19 states that haven't expanded Medicaid. But with the Medicaid expansion, now 70 million Americans are covered under Medicaid. But what's happened is that a lot of these people find out that doctors are not taking Medicaid patients because they're reimbursed at 25 to 40% below what they get paid for treating someone with regular coverage. So emergency room use, according to the Association of Emergency Room Docs, emergency room use is up 5.6% because of this issue of Medicaid people not being able to get a doctor or being on a waiting list that takes too long, so they're using emergency rooms. And that is what, you know, the president said, emergency room use is expensive. A lot of it is uncompensated care, and therefore, you know, we're going to get rid of the uninsured problem. But the exact opposite has happened under the law.
There sure seem to be a lot of unintended consequences of Obamacare. Couldn't they see any of these coming?
They probably did. I think you have to look in a broader way. I think President Obama, Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker of the House at the time, and remember made that famous statement, we have to pass this law so that we can find out what's in it.
Yeah.
They had a broad vision. They really want the government to take over the whole healthcare system. And this is sort of a stepping stone. Remember, Pelosi wanted a public option to compete with private plans. It didn't go through in the Senate version or in the final version. But I think they really want healthcare to be provided for all of us by the federal government, not by private insurers, and that was their long-term goal.
Well, we'll get to that. You know, meanwhile, there were some new models that were put forward under Obamacare, the so-called accountable care organizations that were hyped to improve cost and efficiency. How do ACOs work, and how have they actually panned out?
There were 32 organizations signed up originally under the Accountable Care Pioneer organizations, and doctors and hospitals would receive payment if they came in under cost, and they would have to pay a fine if they exceeded cost. There's been a lot of problems. A lot of the Pioneer ACOs dropped out. Now the government has got a new, it's called sort of ACO Type 2, which are called Next Generation ACOs. And I think there's been many discrepancies because like the Dartmouth-Hitchcock plan, which actually reduced costs, but they covered more people, and so they have to pay a fine. So ACOs, remember the Mayo Clinic, Intermountain. The president said these were great examples of integrated care models, but not one of the four that he mentioned, the Cleveland Clinic, actually signed up for the ACOs because they realized that it was not a workable model.
Well, how has Obamacare impacted the employment scene? We keep hearing about companies cutting their full-time payrolls to stay under the mandate limits. Has anyone published good numbers on that?
Well, there are some numbers just coming out now. Unfortunately, with the president's executive power, the employer mandate for any firm with 50 or more employees was to come into effect on January 1st, 2014. But he made some choices and decided that the model, that the employer mandate for those firms with 100 or more employees came into effect on January 1st, 2015. And just this January 1st, employers with 50 or more employees had to abide by the employer mandate. And if they didn't, then they would pay a fine of $2,000 or $3,000 per employee. The number of hours to qualify for the employer mandate is 30 as opposed to the federal labor law at 40. So the numbers are just coming out now, but I think, you know, a number of people had predicted that companies would move a lot of their employees from full-time to part-time, and we've seen that with Target, Walmart, UPS, Staples. A lot of these companies have cut hours and moved people onto part-time so they don't have to provide coverage. Others cut the spousal coverage that they were providing. So the market works, and employers responded when they found under Obamacare that their premiums were going up significantly as well. And so, and about 160 million Americans get their health care through their employer. And so they're finding now their premiums are up, their copays are up, and their deductibles are up as well for those who are still getting employer-based coverage.
Now, summing it all up on the expense side, Obamacare was supposed to reduce or at least slow the growth of our total national health care expenditures. What do the numbers say?
We, in the U.S., according to the Congressional Budget Office and other federal agencies, we spend about 18% of our gross domestic product on health care. That's about $3 trillion. And true, it is more than any other country in the world. Canada, where I'm from, they spend about 11%. But that's because the government controls how much will be spent. But the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has predicted by 2024 that we're going to be spending $5.2 trillion, or 20% of our gross domestic product, on healthcare. That doesn't look like a reduction to me. That's an increase. So the point is, too, that Americans expect the very best in healthcare. We're all impatient. I'm in America now. We're impatient. When we want to see a doctor, we want to see him now. If we think we have a brain tumor, we want an MRI now. And in these other countries where government is a big player in healthcare, you have to sit on a waiting list, and care is rationed. But we spend a lot. We're a wealthy country, and we demand a lot.
Sally, you recently wrote a book called The Way Out of Obamacare, laying out a plan to address many of the shortcomings we discussed earlier in the show. If you look at the political landscape, Republicans have fruitlessly been trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which will never happen under a Democratic president. Hillary Clinton wants to amend it at the margin, and Bernie Sanders wants to end it altogether, replacing it with a single-payer system. Let's start there. Exactly what is a single-payer system, and how has it worked elsewhere?
So a single-payer system is what we in America would call Medicare for all. A single-payer system is when there is only one payer for doctors, hospitals, and that is the government, whether it's the federal government. Bernie Sanders, under his plan, wants a federally administered plan. Canada, the country where I'm from, has Medicare for all. It has a true single-payer system. Private health coverage is outlawed. But as I said, Canada spends about 11% of its gross domestic product on health care. But the demand for health care is much greater. The government has a global budget and is not going to pay more. So what happens? You have long waiting lists for care. In Canada today, the average wait from seeing your primary care doctor to getting treatment by a specialist is over 4 months.
Whoa.
Care is rationed. So if you're a senior, my own mother passed away from colon cancer in Canada in 2005 because as a senior, she was told she couldn't get a colonoscopy because there were too many people that were younger and had severe symptoms that were on the waiting list. So this is what happens when government is in control, whether it's the UK with its National Health Service. They do allow private health coverage to run parallel, and about 10% of Brits have private coverage. But a true single-payer system, which Bernie Sanders wants, would cost a lot. His plan would cost $1.4 trillion a year, about $15 to $16 trillion over a 10-year period, and would probably cost a whole lot more because demand will be much greater.
I understand that Canadians with money, if they want medical procedures like a hip replacement, they just hop on a plane and go to India and have it done there.
About 50,000 Canadians out of a population of 37 million. There are fewer people in Canada than there are in the state of California where I live, but 50,000 Canadians come every year across the border to the United States to get treatment that they feel that the waiting time for them is too long. And in fact, the former Premier of Newfoundland, Danny Williams, when he was diagnosed with a heart problem that couldn't be fixed in Newfoundland and the wait in Ontario or Quebec for surgery was too long, he hopped on a plane and went to Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami, paid out of pocket for his heart surgery, came back. The Canadian media said, how could you possibly go to that evil United States? And he said, it's my heart, it's my health, it's my choice. So 52,000 Canadians come, they either drive over the border or they fly to Boston or to Detroit, get an MRI, get a knee replacement. Because, if you can't work and you're in pain, there's a cost. There's a tremendous cost to that.
So if either Bernie Sanders gets his way or Donald Trump builds a wall, we'll put a stop to that, huh?
Right, exactly. And we'll all be, where will we go if we are subjected to doctors being employees of the federal government or a state government? Where are we going to go to get the kind of health care that we're used to having? Because America is the innovator in the latest in treatments, in drugs, in biologics.
Well, so Sally, imagine I hand you a magic wand to fix Obamacare. Forget the politics. You're just going to go ahead and fix it. Take us through your laundry list. Where would you start?
I wish I could have a magic wand because I've been fighting this for so long. Well, I think the first thing is that we need to, one of the major problems with our healthcare system, and as I said earlier, about 160 million Americans have employer-based coverage. That was introduced when wage and price controls were in during World War II, where employers got the ability to write off the cost of their health care, and we would get our health care as employees tax-free. And so if you're an individual and you lose your job or you quit your job, you go out into the individual market, you have to buy your health care with after-tax dollars. So first of all, I'd like to level the playing field so that individuals and employers could get their health care with pre-tax dollars.
So by that you mean decouple it from your job?
Right. And ultimately I would like to see this change because we shouldn't be getting our health care through our employers. We should be getting, just like our house insurance, our car insurance, our long-term care insurance. It should be yours and it should be portable.
All right, so that was number one. What's number two?
Instead of the income-based subsidies, which are part of Obamacare, Dr. Tom Price and I and several other Republican candidates have said we really need age-based refundable tax credits so that, depending on your age, if you're 18 to 35, you would get a refundable tax credit of $1,200. If you're between 35 and 50, it would be $2,100. And if you're over 50, your refundable tax credit would be $3,000. Plus, you would get a tax credit of $900 per child. This really would cover everyone as opposed to a tax deduction where those people who don't, have income, it's of no use to them. So this is an important part of a replacement plan.
All right, so keep waving your magic wand. What comes next?
Well, I think consumers should be in the driver's seat, not third-party payers nor the government. And so one of the important parts of our healthcare system that came in under President George W. Bush was the health savings accounts, which were expanded. We really need to expand health savings accounts more. Right now, an individual can put away $3,350 in an HSA plan, which must be coupled with a high deductible insurance plan, $6,750 if you're a family. I would like to see those rates increased to match the level of what you can put away in your independent retirement account. And also that under Obamacare, if you have an HSA, when you reach age 65 and go on Medicare, you can't continue to contribute to your HSA. So I would like to see HSAs expanded to cover people on Medicare and to expand the amount that we can put away, because when you put consumers in charge of their health care, working with their doctor, you're going to reduce cost and you're going to increase the number of people who have coverage.
Well, we're very reliant on our HSA. That's how we handle our enormous deductibles. What do we do about protecting people with pre-existing conditions? That was one of the most popular aspects of Obamacare. Right,
because under Obamacare, insurance companies cannot discriminate based on what you're going to pay for your plan. The ratio is 3 to 1. I think it should be 5 to 1. Plus, there can be no lifetime limit and no caps on the coverage that you get. The problem is that, for those people who have chronic or pre-existing conditions, many of them cannot afford a plan or they cannot even get a plan. So until we get a properly functioning market, I think those people with pre-existing conditions should be able, if they continue to have coverage on a continuing basis, they should be able to get coverage at a decent price. And then when the market actually is working and we have a major pool, because the young people have to cover the risk of the older and sicker people, then there wouldn't be any of these problems with people being kept out of the market because they have a pre-existing or a chronic condition.
So you'd leave that Obamacare provision in place or modified, but what does that do for the adverse selection problem?
Well, we need to get rid of guaranteed issue and community rating. These are things that add tremendously to the cost of health care.
Explain what those are.
Guaranteed issue means that any insurance company has to provide you with coverage regardless of your health status. And community rating means that your rating for what the cost of your plan is set by the state or by Obamacare or by the state itself. You can't charge a different price based on your age or your health status.
So you would recommend getting rid of that and letting the market work?
letting the market work. Under Obamacare, they put $5 billion into extend the high-risk pool so that those people that had chronic or pre-existing conditions could get coverage. Well, that $5 billion was supposed to last until Obamacare really became functional at the end of 2013, on January 1st, 2014. But in fact, the money was used up very quickly. I think until we get a properly functioning market, the feds could put about $7.5 billion a year into these high-risk pools so that we can take care of those people with chronic or pre-existing conditions in the meantime.
Sally, what do we do about malpractice reform? Many of my friends are doctors. They say their malpractice insurance rates are through the roof, and it often forces them to practice defensive medicine, which drives up costs. How do we fix that?
Medical malpractice reform is a huge part of my replacement plan. And remember, the president said doctors do all of these tests because they want to line their pocket with a lot of money. Doctors practice defensive medicine and do a lot of these tests and procedures because they are afraid of being sued. So I think we need medical malpractice reform at the state level. I don't think it should be a federal issue, but it should be at the state level where we cap non-economic damages at a certain level. Because the cost of defensive medicine in this country, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers, is over $200 billion a year.
Wow.
And the reason is doctors practice defensive medicine, and it also means that doctors pay incredibly high insurance rates to cover claims, and in particular claims that many cases are what we call frivolous lawsuits and are not legitimate claims.
And so if we do all these things to the medical insurance market, what do we do with Medicare and Medicaid?
Well, Medicare and Medicaid last year in 2015 both celebrated their 50th anniversary. They were signed into law under President Lyndon Johnson and his Great Society. Medicare and Medicaid each cost in the neighborhood of $450 to $500 billion a year. And according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they will both be bankrupt by 2024 unless we make some changes. Medicare, when it came into being in 65, the average life expectancy was age 65. But today, it's 79. And so a lot of people, are on Medicare that really should not be. A lot of these people want to continue working. They can't play golf all the time. And so we need to voucherize, as Paul Ryan has said, we need to voucherize Medicare. We need to means test it. So people such as a Warren Buffett, he doesn't need, a government program to cover the cost of his health care. And we need to raise that eligibility age upwards 69, 70, so that Medicare will then be available for those seniors who, really need the government to provide them with health care. So we need to voucherize, means test, and raise the eligibility age. And we can do that also through premium support, voucherizing. On the Medicaid side, where now we have, because of Obamacare, 70 million Americans are covered under Medicaid. This program will not be sustainable. I think a lot of the states that expanded their program with the federal funds that end at the end of this year for the increased coverage, many of the states are going to say, hey, we can't afford this. We've got problems of our own. And it may be, if we have a Democratic president, they may say, well, let's take Medicaid under the arm of the federal government, and then we could be on our way to single payer with Medicare, Medicaid, the CHIP program for children, and the VA, all being run by the federal government. It's the stepping stone to single payer. But with Medicaid, we need to block grant the states with amounts so that they can set up their own Medicaid programs and decide who will be covered and what. And we also need to allow people on Medicaid to get coverage in the private market through, an HMO or a PPO, so that they're not demeaned by the fact that when you go to call up a doctor's office and say, well, I have Medicaid, and they say, well, we're not taking
that today,
patients.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So, Sally, take away the magic wand I handed you a few minutes ago to fix our healthcare system. What choices would the electorate have to make in November in order for policy changes along the lines you suggested to have any chance of being enacted?
All Americans want affordable, accessible, quality coverage. They're finding out under Obamacare, with 54% of people still not liking the law, that they want change. So in order for my way out of Obamacare plan to be successful, we need to have a president who is committed to repeal and replacing of Obamacare. We need to have control of the House and the Senate. That would be the Republicans having the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and a candidate who early in 2017, after the inauguration, is committed to repeal and replacement, not fixing Obamacare at the edges. We need one single replacement plan that candidates can rally around and that the new president and Congress can implement.
Well, so Sally, the voters will have their say in November. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
That was Sally Pipes, President and CEO of the Pacific Research Institute and author of The Way Out of Obamacare, here on Real Clear Radio Hour, brought to you by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. I'm your host, Bill Frezza. Real Clear Radio Hour is a partnership with Real Clear Politics, which the New York Times has called an invaluable tool for anyone interested in politics or public affairs. You can check out Real Clear Radio Hour on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Real Clear Frezza. We'd like to thank our long-term sponsor, Old Boston Restorations, for their support. Old Boston is a boutique property management company in Boston's South End. Ahead, we'll speak with Barbara Anderson, Executive Director of Citizens for Limited Taxation, who spearheaded the Massachusetts Proposition 2.5 revolt 35 years ago. Stay tuned.